Yeah. There's a law that Tim Walz signed that says the court can take jurisdiction, which in this instance means custody, over minor children who are not getting the gender-affirming care, which is a lie. There's only two sexes. Gender's bullshit. There's men and there's women. One cannot become the other. And he signed a law saying that they can take jurisdiction over minor children who are not being affirmed by their children and get all of those procedures done outside of any connection. Your parents will have nothing to do with it. They won't have access to you.
That's so dark.
What happens when you combine Tim Walz's leadership style with a blender stuck on political puree? Well, Megyn Kelly and Tucker Carlson didn't just roast him, they slow cooked him on live TV, then served him up with a big helping of what on earth were you thinking? From disappearing police forces to fairy tale tax schemes? Walz's policies are earning the demolition treatment of the decade. Buckle up, because this political crash derby is only revving its engines, and Tim forgot to bring a helmet.
You, Taylor Swift. That's how I would like to begin. This woman has got she's a billionaire. I saw her amazing mansion in Rhode Island. I went to some hotel there, and there it is up on a cliff. You've never seen a more beautiful home. It's one of, 20? She's got so many gifts thanks to all of you. Thanks to your daughters, who you probably had to drag to her concerts, and you want to make your daughter happy, and so you didn't, and it's true whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. And how does she think?
Meet Tim Walz, Minnesota's very own budget brand Napoleon, if Napoleon had traded his battlefield brilliance for a scented candle collection and a passion for bureaucratic word salads. If cluelessness were an Olympic discipline, Tim would be taking home the gold, proudly posing on the podium before signing an executive order banning spectators for safety reasons.
What Tim Walz has done on the LGBTQ front, let me tell you what's gonna happen, okay? Here's what's gonna happen. A little girl sitting in Wisconsin who's maybe on the spectrum, maybe has acne, maybe is a little heavy set, maybe feels upset because the parents are getting divorced, something like that, is going to find herself down a rabbit hole on Reddit. And her parents aren't gonna know because they're getting a divorce and they're not focused on her right now. And she's gonna spend hour after hour on that thing, and Reddit's gonna tell her she's actually a boy. And she's gonna get sucked into this gender cult, and she's gonna say, Mom and Dad, I want puberty blockers into cross-sex hormones, which will sterilize her and deprive her of all sexual pleasure for the rest of her.
Let's start with the governor's remarkable knack for responding to crises with all the urgency of a yoga instructor dosed on horse tranquilizers. Minnesota literally burned, not in a metaphor, but in flames during the riots in Tim Walz's bold leadership amounted to checking his horoscope, firing off a tweet, and holding a press conference that sounded like a TED Talk for sleepwalkers.
Needed a weak man, because it is the party of weak men and unhappy women. One of which leads to the other, by the way. Where you find weak men, you will inevitably find unhappy women. Sorry. And they make them on purpose. They weaken the men to drive the women insane, to have the most consistent voting bloc ever in the history of politics. Unhappy women made unhappy by weak men.
While Target stores turned into bonfires and entire neighborhoods fell into a nightmarish apocalypse, Tim was busy rehearsing his concerned face in the mirror, blaming systemic issues and gently waving his hands around like he was shooing away a mosquito at brunch.
On the disastrous performance he delivered, in particular when it comes to his self-described knuckle-headed behavior. This one was that he was in China when the Tiananmen Square disaster unfolded, when hundreds of people were killed.
I have my dates wrong. I was in Hong Kong and China in 1989. That move from Hong Kong into China, it was profound for me. That was the summer of democracy. I said it's where I understood how sacred democracy was. It's what encouraged me, about 15 back and forth with my students, taking them to China. I speak like everybody.
But don't worry, he eventually took action. He bravely waited until the smoke settled, then launched a statewide listening tour. Yes, listening, because nothing screams leadership like asking traumatized citizens how they would have handled things, instead of, being the governor and doing Your job as for law enforcement, the man's backbone dissolved faster than you could say, defund the police. He tiptoed around the issue like a contestant on Dancing with the Cowards, terrified of upsetting activists, cops, or even the squirrels in his yard. He threw police under the bus, backed over them again, and then blamed the GPS. Meanwhile, crime. Sword carjackings in Minneapolis got so common they were practically the new rideshare. Getting mugged on your morning coffee run just became part of the local experience, like yoga or artisan toast. And Tim formed a task force, which in politician speak means I want to look busy without fixing a single thing.
Of Tim Walz, the court will take custody of her, use the Medicaid funds in Minnesota to provide her all of those things, chop off her breasts, sterilize her with the puberty blockers under the cross-sex hormones. And when this girl inevitably comes to the conclusion that she didn't want any of this, that it only added to her problems, which were the divorce and the acne and the puberty and not any trans issue, who is she going to go to then? This is all because of Tim Walz. That's what Minnesota is doing right now to little girls and boys, taking custody away from the parents so that they can have these procedures without any loving parent there.
Then there was his brilliant plan to reimagine public safety, a scheme so stuffed with buzzwords it might as well have been drafted by ChatGPT. After 3 bottles of boxed wine, he wanted to rethink accountability structures and promote holistic engagement, which is fancy code for I have no clue what I'm doing, but these words sound woke. On education, or what Tim liked to call his personal sandbox of half-baked experiments, Minnesota's public schools turned into a live action. Lord of the Flies with more PowerPoints and fewer adults in charge when test scores fell. Tim's solution was to funnel money into feelings. Kids didn't need math or reading, they needed mindfulness circles. Empathy circles and maybe a little yoga reading and math became optional, but if a second grader could express their truth while finger painting, he called it a win.
About my faith a lot, but Matthew 25:40 talks about, to the least amongst us you do unto me. I think that's true of most Americans. They simply want order to it.
First of all, kudos to CBS for allowing Governor Walz to quote Matthew 25:40 without interrupting him and saying, I'm sorry, that's an attempt at bringing in foreign disinformation campaigns. We can't accept that.
May those words burn on your tongue.
Right.
That's what I thought.
Meanwhile, real teachers were drowning in a bureaucratic swamp so deep you'd need a backhoe plus divine intervention. Just as schedule a parent-teacher meeting lessons stopped being about reading or writing and turned into emotional scavenger hunts curated by Pinterest, overseen by a squad of feelings consultants. Parents were tearing their hair out, not because their kids were failing math, but because the homework came with a trigger warning and a YouTube meditation linked. These kids graduated with the intellectual horsepower of a soggy beach ball thinking. A thesis statement was a tweet, and photosynthesis was an Instagram filter. Tim Walz. He treated public education like summer camp crafts. He posed for photos with school mascots as if he'd personally invented the alphabet, bragging about reimagining classrooms, which meant beanbags, fairy lights, a few iPads, and nobody remembering how to spell government.
She laughed right along. Here they are laughing over their white guy tacos, suggesting whites only eat tacos with meat and cheese, because I guess he's now our official white person spokesman.
Like I have white guy tacos and
What is
like
that,
black,
like mayonnaise and tuna? What are you doing?
pretty much ground beef and cheese.
That's
and,
okay. Do you put any flavor in it?
No.
Oh.
Here's the deal. No, they said to be careful and let her know this, that black pepper is the top of the spice level in Minnesota, you know.
I'm the first vice president, I believe, who has ever grown chili peppers.
I'm trying to
You know,
expand
we'll figure
my
that-
food knowledge.
You know, we've got some cantaloupes. You'll be fine.
But Buckle in the Comedy of Errors was just getting warmed up. Then came COVID Walz's grand debut on the stage of disaster mismanagement. He treated lockdown mandates like collectible Funko Pops. He wanted them all 1 week. He shut down bars then. Gyms, then schools, restaurants, barbershops, skating rinks, even your grandma's. Quilting Circle got the axe. Watching him was like watching a man spin a wheel of shutdowns every Monday, blindfolded sipping kombucha. Executive orders flew out of his office like a suburban dad with a new label maker going wild in the garage. Parks were boarded up like they were hiding nuclear codes. Churches forbiddance, unless your god was a latte at a big box retailer, which stayed open. Of course, you couldn't hug your dying grandmother. but you could absolutely buy 80 rolls of toilet paper standing shoulder to shoulder with Chad in aisle 4.
Nothing wrong with that guy. He's a weirdo. He's a weirdo, and you can tell watching him. And I'm sorry, I've just lived long enough that I know that your gut level perceptions are rooted in truth. They're not always precisely true. I've gotten many things wrong, like the details are unknown to me. But I look at that guy and I'm like, you're a weirdo. And everyone's like, no, he's so normal. No, not normal. Sorry.
And Tim Ever, the PR Jedi, kept swearing it was all about the science, not real science, but science he might have overheard on a Zoom between AC/DC intern and Dr. Fauci's dog walker. The rules made less sense than a kale smoothie fever dream. Thousands could gather for protests, but you couldn't attend a funeral with 6 mourners unless you promised to cry through your N95 churches. Were more dangerous than raves, and birthday parties were basically biological weapons his vaccine rollout. Plan looked like it was scribbled in a game of pin the jab on the donkey. Seniors too obvious, first responders too boring, but if you were a TikTok influencer who loved downward dog and a gluten, free lifestyle, congrats, you made the list. Meanwhile, seniors were smashing their browser refresh keys like Wall Street Day. Traders trying to score a vaccine before their bridge club expired from natural causes.
Lawyer, Walz is not. So Vance is looking at Walz saying, what about my assertion is incorrect? And Walz's response was, it was fact-checked at the ABC debate.
The law is written to try and make a point. That's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
But
this,
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate.
From 2015 to 2023, which was the date Tim Walz repealed the law requiring life-saving care, 24 babies were born alive in Minnesota after an attempted abortion.
And if anyone dared to ask why their asthmatic uncle had to wait, while a 23-year-old with a smoothie blog got the jab, Tim responded like a broken. Alexa stuck on equity, equity, equity. He repeated it so often. Minnesotans started checking their cereal boxes for free prizes labeled equity. His entire administration ran on equity like it was diesel in a clown car of doomed policies, as long as Tim wrapped it in a hashtag, slapped it on a diversity tote bag, and tweeted it with a grainy selfie. Next to a pie chart, he figured he was safe. Equity became his golden escape, hatched the miracle phrase that let him paper over collapsing systems with rainbow colors and captions nobody could even understand.
You know, vote for Tim Walz, who I just want to say once again, I'm totally convinced is creepy. I think I'll be vindicated. I hope I'm wrong, but I think he is. But whatever, he's clearly weak. And Doug Emhoff, his daughter, comes out on stage. I'm trying not to be mean, but like, I look at Doug Emhoff's daughter, miserable, covered in tattoos, and I'm like, anyone who has a child like that should not have political power, because you've messed up enough. Do you know what I mean? I do think that your personal life really matters. If you don't have a spouse who loves and respects you, if you don't have children who love and respect you, I feel sorry for you, but you definitely can't have control over my life, because you have not done a good job.
And let's not forget the economy. Minnesota under Walz had the financial stability of a Jenga tower, and in earthquake, small businesses were crushed by his lockdown orders. While giant corporations enjoyed sweetheart deals like it was Black Friday, for billionaires when people complained about inflation, his advice was basically, have you tried not being poor, followed by a state-funded webinar on how to grow kale in your bathtub. The housing crisis, Tim treated that with all the urgency of a spam folder clean-out rents, exploded homelessness surged. And Tim responded by spraying taxpayer money at it like breadcrumbs for ducks. No aim, no plan, just a photo op and a hard hat with a forced grin.
And by the way, what is he doing in a high school setting with children, talking to them about their sex lives? Like, that's just prima facie wrong. It's totally wrong. And a healthy society would not tolerate that. You are not allowed to have teachers talking to kids about their sex lives. And I don't care if you're saying, oh, they're bullied. Okay. But you're still, adults are not allowed to get involved in the sex lives of children unless they're the parents of those children, period.
He started the LGBTQ alliance.
I just disagree with the entire thing. The gay-straight alliance, like, are you an anti-gay bigot? Well, of course I'm not an anti-gay bigot. I am just against, across the board, creepy teachers talking to other people's children about those children's sex lives. That is totally wrong. And
then came transportation. Tim handled potholes like they were sacred Minnesota traditions, driving on state roads. Felt like off-roading in a war zone, but instead of fixing anything, he dumped millions into unused bike lanes and transportation. Equity studies, whatever that meant, and the light rail project. The answer to a question nobody asked over budget underbuilt, about as reliable as a campaign promise. Meanwhile, Tucker Carlson and Megyn Kelly watched the fiasco unfold with a kind of horrified delight, like someone watching a toddler try to cook dinner. They didn't have to invent Walz's failures. The disaster was broadcast in HD. Tucker said Walz governed like a guy who skimmed one chapter of a socialist manual, then decided to freestyle. Megyn Kelly shredded him like the last scrap of government credibility through a paper shredder. Walz arrived on the national stage already self-destroyed.
Yes, it was a throwaway dumb joke about tacos, but there's a reason they felt comfortable. They would never do that in a way that would denigrate Black people or Hispanic people. People online actually fact-checked. He was lying. He submitted the winning turkey taco tot hot dish and won first place at Senator Al Franken's annual Hot Dish Off back in 2016. The point is simply, what does he do? He shits on fellow white guys because it's so in vogue. It's so, like...
Remember Walz's uncanny gift for blaming everyone but himself? The buck didn't stop with Tim. It packed its bags and fled the state. If a program tanked, he blamed the legislature. If crime spiked, it was societal factors. If Minnesotans were angry, it was a misinformation campaign. At one point, it felt like Tim would blame sunspots if it helped him dodge responsibility in the panels. Oh, he loved a good panel. You couldn't get a decision without surviving a 12-member advisory group, 2 subcommittees, and an equity review. Boards staffed by people who think stoplights are oppressive. The only thing Tim ran with any efficiency was a steady stream of buzzwords into a microphone, and then as the cherry on this soggy Sunday, he had the nerve to talk about running for re-election as if Minnesota hadn't just lived through 4 years of improv theater run by a guy who thinks courage means hiding behind a podium and grinning awkwardly. His campaign slogan might as well have been, "Lower your expectations. Hey, it could have been worse."
Well, there's another thing. There's another thing about Tim Walz that hasn't gotten as much airtime, and it's true. He actually did remove. They were coming up with the Minnesota human rights law and revising it, renewing it. You know, this class is protected. You can't discriminate against these people, and you can't discriminate against gays and lesbians. And the law had said, to be clear, pedophiles get no protection under this law. Pedophiles do not fall under the definition of a protected class. And they removed that language. They removed that language under Tim Walz. That the pedophiles...
But the real kicker, even after all, this Tim Walz still struts around like he cured polio with essential oils. He acts like a hero for surviving the disaster he helped cause, like the arsonist expecting applause for dialing. 911 after lighting the match. Megyn Kelly summed it up. This man is why Americans don't trust blue states. And Tucker Carlson called it a masterclass in how not to run a state.